Today is Wednesday, June 12th, and welcome to episode 347 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Lester Munson. I'm joined today by NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and my fellow Senior Fellow, Bishop Garrison. We're going to talk about European elections, but before we do, let's give a shout out to our often colleague on the show, Morgan Vigna. It is her birthday. Happy birthday, Morgan. She's
she actually skipped today, so we couldn't sing happy birthday to her on the show.
There will be singing at some point. Okay, we're going to talk about the European elections over the weekend. There were 720 seats up for vote in 27 different countries. Some interesting things happened over the weekend with this vote. Conservative parties did pretty well, a little bit better than people expected. Green parties, left parties did not do well. The moderates lost some seats as well. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is likely to be reelected, but perhaps by a different coalition of parties supporting her. In France, the National Rally Party, which is intellectually led by Marine Le Pen, got over twice the vote of President Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party. So that's a notable thing that has caused Macron to call for snap elections in France. The next prime minister of France could be the guy who is actually running the National Rally Party, Jordan Bardella, 28-year-old, interesting character. Macron, notably, his term ends in 3 years, cannot run for re-election. This is his second term. So French politics are about to get really interesting. In Italy, the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who is the head of a conservative party, the Brothers of Italy, her party did quite well, so that strengthens her position as kind of a leading conservative or right-wing voice in Europe. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party, the Social Democrats, came in third in the vote, so a real showing of weakness by him and his party. This comes as the UK is going through an election cycle itself. The Prime Minister there, Rishi Sunak, has called for elections on a date that should offend all Americans, July 4th. I don't think the British should be voting on our Independence Day, personally, but that's what they're doing because they're a free country. But there's a lot of ferment in Europe, a lot of movement around. Bishop, I'm going to go to you first. Talk about what this means for the U.S., for Ukraine, for policies in Europe generally. How should we be thinking about this?
Yeah, so as we were kind of talking before this, I think shouldn't be taken lightly. You're seeing some issues with the rise of the far right within France and within Germany. Macron is going to have to deal with these folks, though, as you mentioned, or work with them, I should say. As you mentioned, he has 3 more years in office, so it's going to be interesting to see what plays out here. But I also think we should look for balance here and not overplay this or look too deeply into it. We're talking about a parliament that has 720 seats. We're seeing a fraction of those are going to be to the far right. They have definitely increased their numbers. And we can argue about the specifics of it, why we're seeing it more in France and Germany, but Poland and Hungary, we're seeing less of this type of effort. Turnout was only about 51% of eligible voters. Just for comparison, in 2020 in the U.S., you were looking at about 66% turnout, which is pretty high for us even. So there was some level of apathy here, voter apathy in terms of turnout. There are issues of immigration that are going on right now. That are just some very hyperbolic debates going about in that area, and some real concerns that need to be addressed that the voters do care about and want to see some level of change. I think the EU, not to compare it to the United States as we sometimes do, I think wrongly at times, but I think the EU is going through a moment that maybe the United States saw begin for us back in like 2009 and continued on through today to some degree in terms of voters wanting to see change, wanting to ensure that their voices are heard, and they haven't been heard by traditional conservatives or liberals. So they're looking for other alternatives, and that allowed for kind of a far right effort to take hold here. But I don't think we should get too crazy about this right now. We should keep an eye on it. but I don't want to make it more than it actually is. The president of the EU is going to win re-election. President von der Leyen, she's going to go right back into office, and she's going to be able to make gains here. So I'll be interested to see what happens in the coming months and years.
Jones, what does this mean for Ukraine? The Italian conservatives have been very pro-Kyiv, have been willing to support Zelensky. The French National Party, which is, or the National Front, which is now the National Rally, has been tilting a little too much in favor of Putin for a lot of people's tastes, including mine. So what do we think? Is there an implication here for the war in Ukraine over the next year or two?
Yeah, I want to step back to, I think, Bishop's point earlier. We talked about, I think, the EU elections. We talked about it, of course, before they took place, and we talked about the elections in India. And I think this is a learning lesson, especially as we walk into, the U.S. maybe walks into a highly charged election year, to step back from the headlines and the pollings and just take a breath. We talked about the panic that a lot of folks were anticipating crossing the European continent. And European voters largely turned out for centrists. There were gains on the far right, but the three leading parties in the parliament remain the same, and the centrists have a majority, even though it's a bit of a shrinking one. They still hold the majority. And like here in the U.S., we talk about the far right. There are still splits and divisions amongst the right across Europe. To your point about Meloni, the right both is very hawkish on Russia, and then there's a few folks that are actually a little more pro-Kremlin, to your point about the National Rally in France. And so it isn't one block, and there is, to your favorite word, nuance amongst those that call themselves right on the European continent. And Meloni she's now kind of surging across the continent. She's going to be working with Macron. She's going to be working with other European leaders, which is really great because she is very, strong when it comes to support of Ukraine. And so also importantly, a lot of foreign policy on the continent is done on the nation state level. It's not done in the EU parliamentary level. And so I think that's, Macron's point in doing a snap election is to remind French voters, your selection is either here with me or it's with the National Rally. And he is hoping that his party comes on top when it comes to national elections, setting aside the EU parliamentary elections, so that he can continue to, be pro-Ukraine and rally that support. So I think, the near term to the immediate term, there is no real impact when it comes to Ukraine and aid. I don't think they have to worry about it. But to voter apathy and kind of discontent amongst all, leading politicians, I think that's something we need to worry about. You brought up the UK elections. You see a majority of the UK now mad about Brexit, not happy with the results, though they voted for it. So it's just discontent with, sadly, whoever may be in power. And the Green Party lost, a lot of some of their seats, and they were wildly popular in 2019. So it's just shifting growing voter apathy and shifting, favorites amongst who they're voting for.
Bishop, what's your sense on the source of the apathy here for European citizens? You can kind of speak broadly about 27 different countries, 25 or so different languages, 350 million voters. Is it the immigration issue that's kind of pushing a lot of this? Is it economic doldrums?
I think there's a little bit of everything. And again, I think you make a good point that it's very hard for us to kind of take a step back and look across so many cultures, different languages, different needs, different religions, and try to draw, one consensus idea of it's this one thing that's affecting voter turnout, voter apathy, how voters see the current elected officials of government. That is difficult. However, we can see that there are multiple things that seem to resonate across the spectrum. I think immigration is one big one. We're seeing it here. We're seeing it across in the UK, across the EU states. That is definitely something. I think some concerns about the potential of a global recession. I would even say some concerns about technology, how we are looking at the rise of AI, not only from a privacy concern rate, but what types of jobs within industries may be affected by companies utilizing AI. I think Jess made a good point about the environment. There are major environmental concerns. You have some people that think some regulations have gone too far. You see in younger voters, some don't think that the current folks have gone enough, and that has an effect on apathy. So there are quite a few things, and that's without even going to the kinetic activity that's happening all around them in Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Hamas, and what's going on in the African continent. So there's so many different issues at play here, but I do think that some of these that we've described and we've named likely play largely in factoring in how voters turned out and how voters actually voted.
No, I'm going to go out on a limb here with a way too early hot take and say these election results are good for Donald Trump.
Please, by all means, go. Continue.
Yeah, I would like
and this is not at all an endorsement or anything remotely close to it, but it'll make it easier for him to claim that he can have good relations with Europe with some of this new mood, and that this hit from the Dems that he's disruptive to American alliances, I think is gonna be less effective than people think. Now, granted, that may not end up being an issue in the election. It's a very subtle, nuanced thing, but I think there's a little element of something here that Trump can kind of grab onto and say, my international approach is going to be more effective.
Yeah, I would point, what new mood? We just said the center holds there. He would, to Bishop, he would point to anything, be like, I predicted this.
It rained, and that's what affected turnout, and damn it, the one should win. And
wait, Celeste, you are correct.
I would even argue, too, that, and not to get the American side on this, last night there was an election people weren't really looking at, a special election in Ohio where Donald Trump won the congressional district by 30 points, and the guy coming in for the special election only won it by less than 9. So that's a big, a 20-odd point turnout, or turnaround on a special election in Ohio is something he really needs to be more focused on than what's going on in the EU.
All right, hot takes abound. Fault lines have been discovered, and that is a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, June 14th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.